Happy Friday afternoon. Well, now we're in the low 40s, or high 30s. I guess it's partly because I'm going out late enough. But the ridge around where I am is sort of gray and misty, and there's a little chill in the air, especially when you've been spoiled by 78 degrees. I stopped off my office yesterday, and another member of the firm was there, and he had a tan, and he'd gone to Florida where it was 88. So you got 10 extra degrees if you go from South Carolina to Florida as of a couple of days ago. So what's going on? I try to talk about truly breaking news, not already broke news that is rehashed and revised, although the details on some of these larger stories invite further comment. Now, one thing I think we can assume is that No Jacket Jordan Unplugged is a public menace. And he's been having these weaponization hearings. He's had his second one, I think, yesterday. And this one was on Twitter and Biden. And apparently it came apart in the room because, well, he's good at breaking China, but he's not much good at making anything, putting anything together. So that's been maybe his lifelong problem. And then as to the Bragg indictment, well, I'm sure you're like me. I'll wait until I see it. There's an interesting thing about the grand juries in New York, and I never had any experience with it, so if somebody hears this and I get it wrong, please correct me. But I was an ADA in the assistant district attorney in the Bronx for a while on a special assignment involving the former head of the labor department, and it was based on an investigation I did on the Hill. But that investigation didn't involve me putting any witnesses before the grand jury. It was basically to collect evidence from other federal sources for the state prosecution. And I enjoyed it, and I worked with some great people. But the grand juries in New York are not run the way, say, a federal grand jury is. So, for instance, if I summon you to a grand jury and you testify under oath, you may have transactional immunity and use immunity. That is to say that you can't be prosecuted for the crime that you talked about in the grand jury. Now, operationally, I suspect what happens is when you invite a guy like Trump to appear, what happens in his case is he has to waive this immunity to testify. In any case, it's a rare instance when the target of the grand jury, meaning that you have enough evidence to indict him, does testify. There are exceptions. I know of one in Virginia in which when the target, a political figure, was called to the grand jury, they did not return a true bill, meaning they did not indict him. So we'll see, I guess, in the days ahead, if anything happens. Now, I don't know why you would call somebody like Trump to the grand jury, but I guess you could. I would always extend to the targets and subjects of a grand jury to appear, but not to give them immunity. And in the federal system, when a person is a target under the grand jury guidelines for the Justice Department, you are, and constitutional law, you have to advise them that you have enough to prosecute them, and leave up to them whether they want to testify under those circumstances. Some do, relatively few. So we'll have to watch and wait and see if Bragg is going to break through the glass ceiling of ever prosecuting successfully a former president of the United States. We've talked a little bit about D.C. And its laws and its relationship, that is the District of Columbia, with the Congress. And now the Congress has another motion they want to make, which is to basically stop a Police Accountability Act in the District of Columbia. Now, after the Hill failed to respond to all of the police misconduct, they want to stop this Police Accountability Act that was worked on very seriously by the District of Columbia. And the Hill wants to give it short shrift because they don't want to have a rule against neck restraints and chokeholds. And if we don't do something about this, this is one of those grounding decisions. That is, what is the ground of our being when we're talking about what are the standards we expect from police, and what do we do when they exceed those standards? And I think it's pretty obvious. You don't do certain things. If you do, you get punished for it. And I don't think you should have qualified immunity, meaning while it may affect the criminal case you bring, or it does not, or that you suffer for your misconduct as a police officer, but they can't recover funds for the people who were suffered as a result of your misconduct. They can't recover because you have immunity for your acts. Well, you know, you and I don't have that, so why should they? And you don't have it in a civil sense if, you know, somebody in your law firm commits an act of malpractice, or there's a whole series of obligations. And when you fail someone, it's not usually intentional, but the kind of misconduct we're talking about for police is necessarily intentional. You know, when you put your knee to somebody's neck and hold it there until they pass out and die, that you have done something sensationally against humanity, and that you must be punished for it. I haven't thought about it for several days, but another thing that I find distressing is that there was a 6-year-old who strangled the teacher, tried to strangle the teacher with a belt on day 1. Day 2, came back with a gun and shot her, and she went to the hospital because of it. And the prosecutors decided not to prosecute the 6-year-old. Now, maybe the prosecutor's not been exposed to children in warlike situations doing things like that. But there's something really wrong about a child in our society that could be possibly trained to accept such violence against an adult who's their teacher. And you got to wonder how we went from day 1, when this child tried to strangle the teacher, to day 2, when the child, 6 years old, brings a gun to the class and shoots her. How is that permissible? Also, you have to ask the parents, because how does a 6-year-old get their hands on a gun loaded, walk in and fire it without conversations with the parents? And, you know, I know what a sad state of affairs our foster homes are and so forth, but this is a child that has to be reworked, because if we don't do it now, we're going to read a story in which he climbs up on a clock tower and shoots people in the street. And it's no exaggeration. It's rare that you get this kind of evidence of a malicious and deadly mind so young. We always talk about, you think of West Side Story, I got a social disease, you know. Well, this isn't a social disease. This is a problem that has to arise from what's happening in the household and the community. And I don't know how you cure that by putting the kid back in that situation. So we'll wait and see what happens there. So I'm out on this kind of chilly day in my cathedral of trees, and I'm glad you could join me. And I'll probably talk to you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.